Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for another chapter in my Deathless series. We have done Advanced Wars 1, we have done Advanced Wars 2, we have done Dual Strike, and Days of Ruin. And since we can't go forward, our only course of action is to go backwards. All the way back to a game which came out for the SNES over 20 years ago. The predecessor to the Wars series, which have gained so much popularity in later years. This is the undisputed classic. This is Super Famicom Wars, and today I'm going to attempt to beat it without losing a single unit. Now, you may think that this 20-plus-year-old game is not going to pose much of a challenge compared to some of my other runs, but I'm telling you right now, this is arguably going to be one of the most difficult and tedious things I have ever attempted on this channel. While Super Famicom Wars is a rather old game, it has certain mechanics which makes a deathless run very tricky to accomplish. First of all, units in this game attack simultaneously. This may sound like a good thing, but I can assure you it's not. Units striking at the same time means that it's very hard to take cost-effective engagements against the AI unless you out-tech them or utilize indirects. It also means that your units will gradually lose HP as they fight, as they'll be slowly whittled down by enemy luck damage. This won't just be a difficult challenge mechanically, it will also be incredibly time-consuming, as the maps in Super Famicom Wars have a tendency to stall hard. This game does not have a campaign in the traditional sense, but rather it has two modes you can play, classic maps and new maps. Each of these have a series of 15 missions which you can beat in any order you like. Once you beat a map, it changes color to the faction you chose at the start of the game, and once you accomplish this with all of them, you will unlock a special secret map. There are 4 of them in total, and these maps are absolutely brutal. One of them in particular has been described as being worse than advanced campaign rivals, and that is not a statement I make lightly. There are, however, a few things that I can use to my advantage. Units in Super Famicom Wars level up as they rack up kills, similar to in Days of Ruin, but the boosts they get are much more significant. A fully ranked up unit has 80% extra firepower and 40% extra defense, which is absolutely insane. However, it does take ages to get there. Still, it's going to be a required strategy if I want to beat some of these missions. Super Famicom Wars also plays very differently to the later Advanced Wars games, but the changes are too numerous to bring up all at once in this intro, so I'll just save them for later when they become relevant. But one thing I will touch upon right away are the COs of this game. Super Famicom Wars have 7 of them in total, but they're in a very weird spot. 4 of them don't really have any special powers at all. They only have different AIs for you to play against them when they're controlled by the CPU. However, the remaining 3 are the elite COs. These do have day-to-day powers, and they are absolutely broken. The problem with this power imbalance between the normal and the elite COs is that if you play as an elite CO against a regular one, the map becomes an absolute face roll. But if you play against an elite CO, the challenge becomes impossible. You see, when you begin a playthrough of a campaign, you cannot change your CO halfway through. Whoever you decide to play as and against will be the same matchup you will have to endure for all 16 maps. I don't know why Super Famicom Wars works this way, it's just how they made the game. The same goes for the rules. Whatever you decide to do, you cannot change them halfway through the campaign. You can only toggle animations on and off. You are stuck with the rest until you beat the secret map. As I said, there are 2 campaigns I can play through, classic and new maps. There is a 4-player campaign as well, but it's intended for multiplayer against other humans, as you don't unlock the secret maps when you beat that, so I'll be ignoring them. My goal is to play through both the classic and the new campaign and beat all the regular maps, and then try to unlock the 4 secret maps and beat those as well. And I have to do it all without losing a single unit. After beating each map, I have to show the casualties tab to prove that I did it without taking any losses. I am, as always, allowed to combine my units together, as that does not count as a loss by the game, and I am able to beat the maps in any way I want, either via domination, HQ cap, or rout. For the classic campaign, I decided to go with the matchup this game has set as its default one, Juan Delta versus Rogensky. Rogensky is the dumbest CO in the game, but trust me, that does not mean this is going to be easy. As for the rules, I decide to enable Domination Victory, which allows me to win if I capture 75% of the properties on the map, and I also toggle on promotions. However, I do decide to turn Fog of War off. I might enable it later though. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are ready to embark on the first mission, Bean Island. We start things off with one of the most classic maps in Advanced Wars history, one that has appeared in pretty much every game afterwards. But in my opinion, this map is one of the worst. It's decent for introducing beginners to the mechanics of your game, but it's a real drag to play due to its choke-pointy design. Before we start, however, let's have a little look at the ground units in Super Famicom Wars, as the game is a little different from the later ones in that instead of having tanks, medium tanks, and neo tanks, we instead have light tanks, medium tanks, and heavy tanks. A system that Days of Ruin would later decide to adopt. In fact, Days of Ruin borrowed a lot of mechanics from Super Famicom Wars, like unit promotions. There are some other small notable changes as well, such as artillery costing 7,000 and recons costing 3,005. And you also have two new units in the supply truck and the flak gun, but they won't really be relevant for this map, so I'll save them for later. I open by deploying a bunch of infantry along with an APC. The APC is not only good for getting my infantry to the contested properties, but in Super Famicom Wars, they can actually attack. Their firepower is comparable to that of a recon, which actually makes them very useful at interrupting captures. However, transport units have two glaring weaknesses in this game. First and foremost, loading a unit into a transport in Super Famicom Wars consumes the transport's turn. This means that you always want to move your transport before loading a unit into it. Doing it the other way around and you can easily end up losing time instead of saving it. Secondly, if a transport unit takes damage in Super Famicom Wars, the unit it is carrying takes an equal amount of damage. This is really bad. It means that you can't really use transports to keep your infantry safe, which is one of the things they're supposed to do. APCs also cannot resupply units in this game. That's why the supply trucks exist. So yeah, just big L's overall for transport units in this game. You almost never want to use them due to how bad they are, but on some maps, you really don't have a choice. Anyway, the strategy for this map is rather simple. I take as many contested properties as I can, and then once I clash with the enemy, I form a wall in the middle. There are no ground units in Super Famicom Wars that can one-shot an infantry at full health, even on a road, so as long as I continually reinforce fresh infantry into the meat grinder, my opponent can't really break through. One incredibly annoying aspect of this game is that unit HP is not visible by default. I have to press a key to show the numbers, and this becomes very tedious to do, and also makes it easy to lose track of what units are damaged, which can be lethal in a challenge like this. Anyway, once my wall is solid, I start building up a massive wall of rockets. Due to the way units attack simultaneously in this game, you really have no choice but to utilize indirects if you want to make cost-effective trades. I try to position the rockets on cities so they are automatically resupplied, and then I just start bombarding the enemy under a barrage of indirect fire. At first it appears that this might be an endless battle, as the enemy CO keeps reinforcing fresh units to the front lines, but then my rockets begin to level up. A neat little thing about Super Famicom Wars, which I really wish they brought back in the later games, is that by bringing up their status screen, you can see the exact damage they deal to other units, and when they promote, these damage values are updated to reflect that. You can see that rockets begin to pack a serious punch after they promote a single time, and after promoting twice, they actually begin one-shotting most ground units, which is very helpful. Once I get multiple promotions to all my rockets, their damage output begins to become seriously insane, to the point where I begin to whittle down the enemy forces before they can even reach me, and before long, I'm able to start advancing forward. At some point, I do decide to turn the animations off as they become a little repetitive, but I will say the overland map animations in Super Famicom Wars are actually real nice. I enjoy that you get a little preview of the battle along with some important information such as fuel and ammo reserves. Slowly but surely, I begin my methodical push into the enemy's base, and before long, I'm able to capture enough properties to score a domination victory. And I gotta say, the victory animation of this game is absolutely adorable. I'm not sure what they're saying. I think it's either goodbye or hooray. Let me know in the comment section if you think they're saying something else. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I beat Bean Island in 25 days. Super Famicom Wars has a very cool post-battle report that was later brought back in Dual Strike, where you can see a bunch of information such as how many units you built, how much money you spent, and a lot of other cool things. But the one I'm interested in is the casualties tab. Here you can see that I beat the map with 0 losses. And with that, Bean Island turns red, and we have just scored the first of many victories. Up next, we have the second map, Donut Island, better known as Crater Isle in the modern games. This is another ground map with a funny quirk. We start with far less bases than the enemy CO, but more cities, meaning our starting income is a lot higher. However, you may also notice that this map has roads going directly from our base straight to the enemies, and you may remember that recons only cost 3,500 in Super Famicom Wars. This means that I can spam them to my heart's content, and they arrive in the enemy base within days thanks to the roads, wreaking havoc on the enemy capture game. In fact, this recon spam is so devastating that I start to occupy the enemy bases, preventing him from deploying units. He does eventually get a tank out, but by then I have a medium tank of my own reach the front lines, and in his infinite genius, deploys units like artillery and supply trucks to help defend his base. Yeah, I did say the AI was smart in this game, but Rogensky has the stupid AI. Sadly, just as I'm about to claim my victory, I forget that APCs can attack in this game and loosen infantry, and thus I have to resign. And wow, this game really likes to rub it in your face whenever you lose. Just look at that defeat graphic. Alright, you don't have to show me his infantry marching over to my HQ. I get it, game. I lost. Knock it off already. Wow. Even the map turns blue when the AI wins. This game likes to punish failure with insane ridicule. On my second attempt, things go much better. By now, I've perfected my recon opener, and I pretty much lock down the enemy before he has a chance to do anything. And I even completely rout him off the map by day 12. And of course, I do so with 0 casualties. And with that, Donut Isle turns back red, and I claim my second victory of this challenge. Up next, we have Mission 3, Onigri Isles, and this map is incredibly dumb. 2 islands with no naval units and aircraft being the only way to get over to the other side. I have a feeling this one is not going to be very fun. Speaking of aircraft, this is the first map where we can deploy them. Most of these units should be familiar to you, though the prices are slightly different. But the one unit which probably stands out to you is the Striker. If I were to describe this unit, I'd say it's like the Duster from Days of Ruin, but much stronger. It's a versatile aircraft that can attack any unit in the game except for submarines, and it deals decent damage too, though it is very weak to fighters and very expensive. Starting off this map, I see a huge problem. The only way to win here is via route. Trying to ferry over infantry with T-copters is not going to work. And yet, in Super Famicom Wars, units strike simultaneously, meaning my bombers won't really be able to handle anti-air, and the AI will build quite a few of them on this map. So I think the only option is to rush before Rogensky can accumulate too many units. So after quickly capturing most properties on my island, I deploy a single fighter for anti-air defenses and then proceed to build up a force of bombers. But there's another problem that's rather unique to Super Famicom Wars. Flak guns. The AI builds them quite often, and they're very cheap. And even though they have similar range to artillery, they still do quite a lot of damage to aircraft. The fact that they are there keeps the enemy CO safe until he can get more anti-air units out. And when that happens, I have to pull my bombers back. Since I can't really go near his base, I decide to just try and level up my bombers on stray infantry units, and pray that I can get them to a high enough rank where they can actually challenge the anti-air. But I realize that I'm in for the long haul. After playing for about 12 turns or so, I realized that my fighter is rapidly coming close to crashing. Super Famicom Wars does not tell you when a unit is low on fuel, you kinda have to check it yourself. Furthermore, supply trucks can't fuel plane units in this game. They can supply copter units, but not airplanes, which actually makes a lot of sense. The only way to refuel them is to send them back to your airport, and sadly, I don't have enough fuel left for that, and thus my fighter crashes, forcing a reset. Hashtag Olaf moment. On my second attempt, I go about things a little differently. I deploy a missile in the center of the map, which I use to shoot down battle and transport copters, and then I decide to rush bombers into the enemy base to see if I can pick off the anti-air before they can build up to a critical mass. But then I discover something incredible. The AI refuses to attack my bombers with his anti-air. Anti-air actually deal pretty terrible damage against bombers in Super Famicom Wars, 35 at base, and thus the AI doesn't consider the engagement cost effective, and simply leaves them alone. This means that my bombers have free reign to terrorize the enemy base. The only thing I have to watch out for are flak guns and missiles, which are quite easy to deal with. Once I start doing this, the map becomes a complete joke. It does take a little while to rout all the enemy units, as the AI keeps spamming quite a lot of them, but my bombers level up and become stronger with each turn. Towards the end of the map, most of my bombers are level 2, and it's quite hilarious to see just how much damage they do at that rank. I can only imagine how strong they are at max rank. I also managed to get my missile up to level 2, and it still kinda sucks. Anyway, after 28 days, I finally managed to rout every single enemy unit. And as you can see, I did it with 0 casualties. With that, the Onigri Isles turn red, and we have cleared out yet another mission. Up next is Mission 4, Ball Islands. And I just gotta ask, what is up with every single map so far being some kind of island? Anyway, this is the first naval map. Each player has a large island each, with 3 smaller ones in the center. And let me just say, if you haven't seen naval units in Super Famicom Wars yet, you're in for a treat. Remember how overpriced they are in the later games? Well, Super Famicom Wars was even worse. Cruisers, 22,000. Landers, 16,500. Submarines, 24,000. But the most insane of them all, battleships, for an astounding 35,000. Now, I will grant them this. Battleships in Super Famicom Wars are quite insane. They can actually attack air units with their indirects, meaning that they're essentially a battleship and a carrier all in one. And they even have defensive anti-aircraft guns to ward off direct attacks from enemy aircraft, as well as an absolutely insane supply of fuel and ammunition, making them last very long before they have to go back for supplies. Sadly though, because this map has airports, naval units will play second fiddle to them, as fighters and bombers are just so much better at contesting the area. And that's what I do. I open up with 2 fighters to try and block the enemy transports from reaching the central islands, and it goes well at first. I'm able to deny the enemy CO all 3 islands, though a single infantry does slip through my cracks and starts capturing some properties. The problem begins when a single lander makes its way through the Southern Sea, carrying a medium tank. And while I do have a battleship on the way, it's not able to get there in time to protect my infantry units. Now, some of you may say, but Mengs, you have captured airports on the central islands. Why don't you just build battlecopters or bombers to protect your units? And to that I say, I can't. Super Famicom Wars does not allow you to build anything in bases that are not around your HQ. Airports, harbors, and bases captured anywhere else are basically just glorified fuel and repair stations. Why did they decide to make the game this way? I don't know, but it means that the only way I can help my units out on the islands is to reinforce them from my main base. And sadly, I don't make it in time. Roginski drops off his medium tank on the island, which surrounds my infantry with 2 others of his, and without any way to evacuate my infantry out of there, it goes down, which sadly means I have to resign and restart. On my second playthrough, I decide to not waste precious time and funds building useless naval units, and I simply go with the strategy of the last map. I spam bombers and fighters. A lot of bombers and fighters. Bombers are, after all, pretty good against naval units. Or are they? Actually, it turns out bombers are terrible against naval units in Super Famicom Wars for whatever reason. I mean, you can still kill them if you have enough, but it just takes a while. However, turns out I don't actually need to kill the landers, I just have to block them from reaching my islands, which bombers can still pull off reasonably well. So it actually does work out in the end. Now, fun fact, bombers may not be very good against naval units, but you know what unit is? The Striker. For whatever reason, it deals almost double the damage against naval units compared to bombers, so I decided to build a single one just to test it out. Anyway, because the AI once again refuses to attack my bombers with this anti-air, the only units I have to watch out for are enemy flak guns, missiles, and other fighters. But the biggest enemy of this battle is actually fuel. Since the only way I can refuel my aircraft is to send them back to the central islands where I have 2 airports, I have to constantly monitor the fuel levels of every single fighter and bomber I have on the front lines. And let me just tell you, those fuel reserves, they go down fast. And towards the end of the map, I decided to just say screw it and just go for the route victory, until I noticed that my striker has 10 fuel remaining, meaning I effectively have 2 turns left to wipe out the enemy. In the end, I managed to do it without too much difficulty, but I still sweat a little. On day 24, I destroyed the last unit to claim my victory, and as always, I do it with 0 casualties. With that, Vol Islands turns red, and that's another map cleared. Up next, we have Mission 5, Coral Lagoon. At first glance, this appears to be a fairly standard map. Our base is pretty close to the enemies, but in order to get there, we have to go on a very roundabout path. There are lots of neutral cities in the north, and my initial strategy is building a recon early on to try and disrupt the enemy capture game. This doesn't really work, however, as the AI has a much shorter path to these cities, and he deploys a light tank to ward me away. So I decide to try a different opener. This time, I build an APC early on and try to get to the cities, but the fact that the APC needs to spend a turn to have an infantry loaded into it means that this isn't as quick as you might expect. Also, by the time my APC is able to arrive in the center, the enemy already has a light tank deployed, so this is pretty much useless. My third strategy is to rush out a heavy tank early on and try to wrestle control from the middle. But the AI soon surrounds it with trash units, and because I'm incapable of capturing any of the neutral cities in the center, the heavy tank will run out of fuel and ammunition sooner or later, or even worse, get surrounded by rockets and artillery. It slowly dawns on me that there is no good way to complete this map quickly. This is going to be a slog. The AI actually takes every single contested property on the map, and it's very hard to prevent this without losing a unit, meaning his income is going to be much superior to mine. So I dig my heels in and do the only thing I can. I build a wall of rockets and some tanks to guard the choke point leading into my base. With the supply truck keeping their ammunition reserves high, the rocket starts blasting away at the incoming enemy troops. Because the bases are so close, I can even lock down the leftmost enemy base with a rocket of my own, so at least I can take some pot shots there. For a while, this actually ends up being very intense, as there's just so many enemy units coming towards me. I have to prioritize shooting down the enemy rockets as they can shoot back at me, but I also have to spend a lot of time attacking infantry and mechs as they are able to traverse the mountains, making them very dangerous. For a while, I'm starting to think that this mission might just be impossible, as there's no sign of the enemy stopping. But slowly and surely, as my rockets begin to level up, and thus they start dealing more damage, and the once massive flood of enemy units slowly trickles down to the point where I can actually start gaining some ground. However, knowing that rockets won't cut it, I decide to try and level up my heavy tank to max rank, at which point it should be able to just dominate the enemy army. If you ever wondered what a max level heavy tank looks like in Super Famicom Wars, here you go. Man, look at that damage. That plus 40% extra defense means this thing will obliterate anything it comes into contact with. Here's a montage of my heavy tank destroying things. Oh, and just because I know you're curious, this is what a max rank rocket looks like as well. They pretty much one-shot everything except for other heavy tanks, which are pretty resistant to indirect fire. Anyway, after about 1.5 hours and 71 in-game days, I capture enough properties to score a domination victory. This was probably one of the most brutal slogs I've ever had to endure thus far, and I fear it won't be the last. And of course, I did it without any casualties. At long last, the Coral Lagoon turns red, symbolizing the carnage inflicted by my rockets. And with that, we have another mission cleared. Up next, we have Mission 6, Puzzle Trio. Would you look at that, another island map. This time around, we have a large island in the center with many properties already owned by the blue player, meaning he has a huge income advantage. By now, I'm starting to figure out the best tactics for this sort of map, so after opening up some transport copters, I built a fighter to wrest control of the skies. But this time, it's not quite as easy to hold the central island. Rogensky sends a lot of units my way, as the AI is actually pretty decent at transporting units in Super Famicom Wars. Unlike the later Advance Wars games, where the AI just tends to let the landers sit idly simply by at their harbors doing nothing. As a result, I actually face a lot of units early on in the center. Luckily, there's a solitary choke point that I can use my fighter to block off completely, but I still have to contend with enemy infantry, fighters, and anti-air. I actually come dangerously close to losing a unit many times. Luckily, the Super Famicom Wars AI isn't terribly keen on finishing off wounded units and prefer to attack healthy ones to do as much damage as possible. However, to bolster my island defenses, I decided to start deploying battleships. And let me tell you, battleships are absolutely fantastic on the defense in this game. And because of their massive fuel and ammo reserves, they can stay on the front lines for a very long time before needing supplies. Oh, and speaking of supplies, supply trucks can't refuel naval units in this game, so the only way you can do that is by pulling them back to a harbor, which is really annoying. In order to protect my battleships, I decided to build some cruisers and submarines to complement my naval force. Submarines are actually pretty decent in Super Famicom Wars. Cruisers, on the other hand, oh boy, the next time you feel useless, just watch this engagement. Yes, that's a unit worth 24,000 attacking another worth 8,005. If you thought cruisers were bad in the later Advance Wars games, just know that they were buffed heavily since Super Famicom Wars. Anyway, once I build up a critical mass of battleships, the map becomes quite easy as I'm able to just lock down the enemy base under a barrage of battleship fire. Just for fun, I tried to get some of my units to max rank just to see how powerful they are, but I only managed to get this bomber to rank 3, though I feel that's more than enough to one-shot every single unit in the game. I also got my fighter to rank 3, and while I did my best to try and level up my battleships, they actually take forever to level up in this game. I think it's tied to their high base price. The best I could get was a rank 2 battleship, which is still pretty terrifying. Anyway, on day 36, I blast the lone remaining mech to claim my victory, and of course, once again, I did it with 0 casualties. The puzzle trio is solved and thus it turns red, and with that, we've cleared yet another mission. In these deathless challenges, maps that may otherwise seem hard can become quite trivial, but the opposite is also true. A normally inconspicuous map, which looks like a breeze, can easily turn into the hardest mission of this challenge. When I saw Mission 7, Fifth Peninsula, I knew based on my prior experience with deathless runs that this was going to be a very hard map to beat. It may not look that bad at first glance, it's a very small, ground-based map, but you have to consider two things. 1. I can't lose a single unit, and 2. Units attack simultaneously in this game, meaning I can't just win by having good positioning and getting first strikes. However, the biggest problem by far with this map is that the enemy starts with 9 pre-captured cities, meaning his income is substantially higher than mine. While I'm stuck the first few turns being only able to deploy infantry, Rogensky deploys a medium tank and artillery on day 2, and this combination is very difficult for me to deal with when I have an income of 4,000, barely enough to build normal tanks. Furthermore, because Rogensky don't have to spend several turns capturing neutral properties, his infantry just darts over to mine, meaning this map gets heated very fast. I'm able to get out a medium tank of my own for defense, but it's not enough, and I still lose one of my infantry and have to reset. On my second attempt, I tried to rush a recon to counter the infantry he sends to the north, but in doing so, I completely yield the southern properties. The only thing I can do is build an infantry wall and deploy artillery behind it to protect it, since I don't have any money for rockets. But the problem is that Rogensky is so aggressive that the artillery have to fire from my own bases, meaning they are preventing me from deploying more units. And Rogensky's own artillery is making it very tough for me to build walls, as infantry can't survive a hit from his artillery plus any other unit, even when on a base. Before long, Rogensky deploys his very first rocket, and while it will take some time to arrive, when it does, it will spell my doom, as I have no way of dealing with it. Forget trying to beat this map, I'm struggling just to hold on, and once the enemy starts deploying heavy tanks, I know that I simply can't stall this map out. I need to completely change up my strategy. On my third attempt, I change up my playstyle to minimize the amount of infantry I deploy, as they're not really able to reach the cities anyway, and then I base skip a bunch to get out 2 early heavy tanks. But this doesn't really go well either. Sure, the heavy tanks are strong, Rogensky can't really deal with them, but he can move past them and attack my squishy units in the back, and my right flank completely collapses once he brings up a tank there. Instead, I decide to go with another strategy. I just spam infantry. Lots and lots of infantry, and I attempt to use them to plug up the gaps in the mountains. At first glance, this actually seems to work. I'm able to plug both entrances to my territory, which actually lets me capture many of the properties there. And with the added income, I'm at least able to put up a fight. The big problem comes when Rodzinski's infantry start arriving on the scenes. They're able to cross mountains, which threatens my own infantry. And even though I am able to hold them off, he still deploys the inevitable rocket, which starts moving towards the choke points, and once it arrives, there is no way for me to hold on. Try as I might, it seems that this map is actually impossible to do deathless. The enemy's income is just too damn high, and his build order counters anything I'm able to afford this early on. I simply don't have the economy to protect all my units. I'm able to eventually survive the mid-game, but the game quickly reaches a point where it's just impossible. Rodzinski simply has too many artillery and rockets deployed in the backlines, which just destroys my walls. I try pulling back to my HQ and just yield the neutral properties, but in doing so, I give him a domination victory because he's able to capture 75% of the properties on this map, meaning that I can't even stall this out. I have to defend my cities. At this point, I'm ready to throw in the towel. This challenge simply seems too insane, but you guys know me. I'm stubborn, and so I decide to take a long break from this map and return later on with some renewed determination. I spent some time thinking and just analyzing the map. One important aspect of Super Famicom Wars is the fact that units on tires cannot enter forests at all. This means that if we take a look at this map in detail, we can see that there's quite a few forest tiles in the enemy territory. These forest tiles are essentially no-go zones for rockets, and since rockets have a range of 5, that means that once Rodzinski gets them into these positions, I am in trouble. In order to stop that, I need to ensure I don't kill too many of his units early on. This might make the enemy bottleneck themselves and actually get in each other's way. And if a rocket does reach one of these points, I need to have a rocket of my own ready to fire back at them. And so I get to work. I reset countless times trying to find an opener where I get enough infantry out to capture the properties and plug the gap, but not too many. I need money for rockets after all. I have to build a few recons to help guard the area where the infantry crosses the mountains. And it's also important that I get a single artillery out so that I can damage his medium tank down to 5 HP, but not below that, since that'll put it back into repair mode. Inevitably, Rodzinski does deploy his rockets and start moving them towards the front lines. But because I have optimized my opener, I am able to get my own rockets in position to shoot at them before they get there. And it turns out I am just barely able to pull this off. You guys have no idea how much I had to optimize my opener to make this happen. The left flank is by far the most precarious. I need to have my rockets fire on the enemy rockets and artillery before they can attack the choke point. But I also have to fire on the enemy infantry and mechs, as they threaten to finish off my weakened infantry in the choke point. The mechs are also problematic because they can actually fire on my rockets from the mountains, and if they do that, Rodzinski's wounded rockets might finish them off. I cannot begin to state how much thought and effort was put into every single turn of this game, as I had to place each of my units perfectly to prevent the enemy from finishing me off. The fact that Super Famicom Wars does not display HP on the map at all times is very annoying, but it just means I have to slow down, take my time, and survey the battlefield. If I make a single mistake, one of my infantry units will get picked off. But slowly and surely, I start to develop a working strategy. Once I get all my rockets in position, I'm able to use them to pick off all the priority targets. And now, it's simply a matter of repeating this process until my units begin to level up. After playing this map for over 3 hours, it looks like I've made little to no progress, but I have. My rockets are ranked up now. They deal way more damage, and some of them even have improved defense. I decide that instead of trying to finish off units, I just wound them, because the AI is actually very meticulous about pulling them back to cities to repair them. However, if I do this enough, it eventually gets to a point where he spends most of his money repairing, and he's actually unable to deploy the more expensive units like rockets. In a sense, I am bleeding the enemy dry. And because of this, I am eventually able to start my inevitable push into the enemy's base. I have to be super careful though. Even a single mistake at this point can still cost me dearly, so I inch my forces slowly and surely towards the enemy HQ. And at long lasts, on day 41, I march an infantry over there and start capturing it. On day 42, I finally blow up the government and finish the capture. Man, that was absolutely horrible. I hope I never have to do that again. Up next, we have Mission 8, Deer Harbor. Fun fact, this was the first map I played on the channel back in 2013, so I'm quite familiar with it. This is an absolutely huge map with several smaller islands, so I'll be needing to use both air and naval units to win here. To start off with, I do my true and tested strategy of building transports, rushing out fighters to shoot down enemy transports, and send them out to various islands, and it works pretty well. I send some of my transport copters south to capture the big island, and then I also send a single transport east to capture the airport on the enemy island. You'll see why I do this in a bit. Once I build up a solid income, I decide to deploy my secret weapon of this mission, Strikers. Strikers are amazing on this map because they're very good against all kinds of units, especially naval units, though they do struggle a bit against fighters. But the enemy isn't deploying many of them yet, so I take advantage of this while I can. I move one of my Strikers east and park it on top of the airport I just captured. As long as I occupy it, the enemy is not likely to get it, since their anti-air refuse to attack Strikers in this game. And this gives me an important foothold, as I now have a way to refuel my aircraft in enemy territory. And let me tell you, once again, fuel management proves to be the biggest challenge of this map. By the time my aircraft makes it into enemy territory, their fuel reserves are already halved, meaning I have to be careful and monitor them extremely closely to ensure they can get back to one of the airports in time before they crash. As I continue to mass Strikers, I eventually feel like I'm running out of airport capacity, as I can only refuel so many units per turn. So instead of just spamming more of them, I begin to mix in naval units into my composition. Battleships, submarines, and even a cruiser for good measure. I also built a lander and begin transporting anti-air to the islands to ward away enemy fighters, because while anti-air don't deal great damage to them in this game, it's still a very cost-effective engagement, as the fighters can't strike back. Not to mention, attacking fighters with fighters of my own will result in both of them taking 5 hit points of damage. I gotta say, unit striking simultaneously in this game really makes it so much different. You have to approach everything in such a weird way, and I totally understand why they changed it in the later games. Once again, the enemy's inability to attack my air units with anti-air means that they can do roughly what they want as long as they take care to stay out of range of missiles and flak guns. The number one priority is really just ensuring they can make it back to an airport before crashing it, and I come dangerously close to losing a unit several times. Towards the end, my patience does run a little thin, and I decide to just make a mad dash for the finish, as many of my Strikers are on sub 20 fuel. And towards the end, I'm starting to sweat a little, as I think I can get a domination victory by capturing some properties, but it turns off I'm slightly off my count, and I don't get it. I try to rout Rodzinski, but he keeps spamming out units, despite the fact that I have battleships occupying his harbor. I feel like I'm playing whack-a-mole with his units, and as one of my Strikers is on 5 fuel and is about to crash next turn, I wonder if this is actually going to result in a loss. However, I managed to capture the final property I need for a domination victory, breathing a sigh of relief. All in all, this map took me about an hour to beat, as well as 38 in-game days, and of course I did it without suffering a single casualty. With that, Deer Harbor turns red, and we've successfully cleared yet another map. We move on to Mission 9, Alara Range. Look at that, the first map that isn't some kind of island. And yeah, I can already tell this one is going to be easy. Now, why do I say this? Because this map is Choke Point City, and if there's one thing I know about the AI, it is that it absolutely cannot handle choke points. This is because the AI moves its units in a set sequence. It doesn't know the concept of moving a unit out of the way to make room for another. It first moves Unit 1, and then it moves Unit 2, and Unit 3, and so forth, until it goes through the list of all of its available units. Because of this, it just ends up bottlenecking its own forces to hell and beyond. All I need to do to win is get out a few battlecopters and then just use them to plug the gaps, and Rodzinski literally can't do anything about it. If I then bring out some artillery, I can take shots on the units that are trapped underneath the weight of their own mass, and then I just need to use transport copters to move my infantry to the properties which are now undefended. Once my income grows, I start deploying fighters and bombers to speed up the process, and before long, I score my domination victory. It does take some time, but this is probably one of the easiest maps in the challenge thus far. I beat it in 24 days, and with 0 casualties. Alara Range turns red, and we've cleared yet another map. Next up is Mission 10, Lost River. This is an incredibly weird map because at first glance it looks like a land battle, but if you actually notice the bridges, there's actually no land connection between the two bases, meaning that the only way to win is via air units and infantry crossing the river. So I do what I always do, I transport infantry out to the contested properties and spam battlecopters. I even discover something hilarious. Even though the enemy deploys anti-air, I can still whittle it down bit by bit if I just rotate out the damaged battlecopters, as the simultaneous strikes eventually chips away at its HP enough to the point where it's not a threat anymore, forcing it to withdraw. And then, once I've properly bottlenecked up the enemy forces that replace it, the rest of the map becomes a complete joke, as the AI just can't handle these maps well at all. And I can just take my time building up my economy until I eventually am able to spam out strikers and bombers that eventually overrun the enemy. Fuel is a problem as always, there's a few close calls where I almost crash, but aside from that, this mission really isn't challenging at all. On day 33, I rout my opponent and score my victory, and I do it with 0 casualties. The Lost River turns into the Red River, and we've beaten yet another map. Now, I need to take a bit of a break from this shit, so I'm gonna hand this next mission over to a friend of mine.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Ephraim225 and I will be playing the 11th map, Volcano Isle. This is a relatively simple map compared to many of the others in this game, as it's just barely bigger than the screen, a little smaller and the map wouldn't even need to scroll. This is one of the easier missions due to the low funds, and the low map size means air units are in little danger of running low on fuel. This map starts out simple enough, but you'll notice that I actually turn off auto supply here. You can in fact toggle an option that makes it so units don't supply and repair at the start of the turn, allowing you to trigger it manually, which can lead to some shenanigans, but in my case I simply wanted to avoid paying automatically for my infantry to get their fuel back. By the way, did I mention that fuel costs money in Super Famicom Wars? Yeah. This allows me to get a T-copter and B-copter built very early. My main strategy here is to have B-copters blocking 2 obvious choke points on the map at the top and bottom of the island. Most of the time I'm able to get a tank to approach my B-copter. The enemy doesn't like this engagement and so never actually attacks, so the B-copter is kept safe from the anti-air right behind it, which never moves anywhere else. And Rodzinski never seems to want to build a second anti-air, so this eliminates that threat to my air units entirely. Meanwhile, I build a fighter very early on as well. It's not cheap, I have to save up some money for it, but it has about a 50-50 chance to one-round enemy helicopters, leaving them at 1 HP if not one-round them. If the fighter ever levels up, then 50-50 becomes a 100% chance. I like having a fighter to remove the enemy B-copter threat, and it also helps in case Rodzinski gets a fighter of his own, but I never see that happen due to the very low income. Getting back to the choke point strategy, there is a possibility that a flak gun will approach your B-copter. If this happens, I suggest getting a bomber ready and blasting the flak gun that way. Anti-airs will never attack a bomber because it's a bad engagement for them. Of course, if the choke point is being blocked by an enemy artillery or even the flak gun itself, you can block the choke point with a recon or even infantry and achieve the same effect. Of course, these are all possibilities. What happened in the playthrough you see here was that the indirect units went south and the anti-air went north, a near perfect scenario as the HQ is more towards the south. The actual movements of the enemy units can vary somewhat. In my experience, I've had both the anti-air and flak gun go north, complicating the choke point strategy. In this case, however, both of the anti-air units went in different directions, so I'm completely safe. Rodzinski never seems to want to build a third anti-air unit. Oh, and also keep a small eye out for infantry sneaking over the mountains. To win the map through property capture, you need 20 out of the 26 properties, that is to say, every single property that isn't a base or HQ. When I play these old games, I tend to lean more towards the faster option. Still, be careful as you approach the HQ. I made a mistake here and my infantry took a small hit. That'll delay me by 1 day, but it's better than losing the whole run. Luckily, Rodzinski likes to leave his bases wide open when he either has no money or I guess doesn't feel like building stuff that turn. So I make as many attacks as possible while simultaneously blocking the bases. With no units nearby that can destroy my air units, Rodzinski really can't do anything but sit there and hope I decide to, I don't know, delete a unit or something. This wasn't exactly the most interesting map of all time with the computer just not being all that great, but a win is a win. If nothing else, you get to witness the most amusing animations ever created in Advance Wars. Because I felt like showing them, of course. With that, Volcano Isle is cleared in 16 days with no casualties, another mission well completed. Now if only the rest of the maps were this simple. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, that was interesting. I might have to ask that guy to come back and clear some more missions for me in the future. Anyway, up next is Mission 12, the Turtle Atoll, the first pure naval map in the game. There are no airports here, so ship combat is our only option, which is a breath of fresh air, as I love naval combat. I start this map by capturing all the properties on my main island, and then build landers to escort them onto the contested ones. It's easy to reach them before the AI, since he doesn't really prioritize getting them. Then I start building submarines, and send them towards the enemy landers, completely shutting them down. Rodzinski does counter with a cruiser, and I almost lose my submarine in the process, but once my battleship arrives, it is easy to get rid of it. I then use my landers to transport a pair of rockets on each of the contested islands, which allows me to completely lock down the eastern and western canal. Before long, I have a horde of battleships in the enemy harbor locking down the enemy bases, and once I start to systematically wipe out the enemy troops, I can escort infantry onto the island and begin capturing properties, which eventually leads to a domination victory. It's slow going, but not particularly difficult. I win the map in 39 days, with 0 casualties, the Turtle Atoll turns red, and we've beaten yet another map. Up next is Mission 13, Squash Island, a long, narrow map with airports and a single choke point in the center. Well, I'm sorry if my tactics are getting kinda samey at this point, but if it works, right? I use a single battlecopter to clog up the entire enemy army while I deploy strikers and bombers en masse. You know what? I'm tired of this strategy. Let's do something a little more exciting. I build a lander, some T-copters, and send them around the bulk of the enemy forces, and then I rush Rodzinski's HQ, using my strikers and copters to block the bases. And it actually works out very well. Sadly, my landers take some damage on the way there, so my infantry is at 4 HP, so a capture sequence that would normally take 2 days ends up taking 5. It does get a little hairy towards the end, with Rodzinski deploying a cruiser and almost destroying my battlecopter, and I have to evacuate my bomber entirely as I can't keep it safe. But remarkably, I'm able to buy just enough time to capture Rodzinski's HQ, scoring myself a victory in a mere 28 days, and with no casualties to boot. Squash Islands turn red, and we are very close to the final mission. Then we have Mission 14, Cube Keys. This is a very wonky map with tons of narrow strips of land that forms little cubes of water, hence the name. At first glance, this map looks like a complete face roll since it's practically choke point city, and as we've established several times already, the AI can't handle choke points well. But a few days into this map and I discover it's far more challenging than I first anticipated. Sure, the AI is easy to handle when there's a single choke point, but Cube Keys has a ton of them, and I have to do battle on multiple fronts. As always, air units rule supreme, and I do go with my true and tested strategy of rushing out a fighter and then eventually strikers and a few battlecopters. But I actually have to play very carefully as Rodzinski is threatening multiple fronts with his vehicles, and it actually ends up being quite a challenge. I tried to get all the contested airports early on so I can refuel my aircraft in prolonged battles, but I actually do end up having to concede one of them as Rodzinski simply applies too much pressure in the area. It becomes a battle on multiple fronts where I have to be very careful and think several turns ahead, as my units are very likely to get trapped, due to the fact that T-copters expend their turn when an infantry are loaded into them in this game. It makes it very hard for me to evacuate my infantry. However, with some careful planning and clever choking, I am eventually able to start capturing more and more properties, and with the increased income comes more strikers, and with each one I add to my army, my map control strengthens, until I am at last able to simply overwhelm Rodzinski with pure force and block all of his bases. I then bring in a single T-copter to capture the HQ, and on day 31, I complete my capture to earn myself a victory. And of course, as always, I do it with 0 casualties. With that, Cube Keys turns red, and we only have a single map left before we unlock the secret mission. It is at long last time for the penultimate map of the first campaign, Mirror Islands. And when I initially saw the layout of this map, I thought to myself, Man, this is gonna be an easy one. 2 small choke points in the center, just plunk down some strikers and it's an easy win. But wrong was I, because the AI actually deploys a lot of missiles and flak guns on this map, making it very hard for me to maintain those choke points with air units alone. This forces me to retreat very quickly, as I cannot stand up to the horde of units coming my way without losing a unit. Once Rodzinski's forces begin to spill over the river, this actually becomes a very difficult challenge, since the map is incredibly open in the center, giving me very little terrain to work with. Luckily, the AI is very reckless with its rockets, moving them towards me at full speed. But this also forces me to overextend, and I come close to losing a unit multiple times. Slowly but surely though, I managed to push the enemy back over the river. And once I establish some zone control with indirect support, it does become very easy to manage the units Rodzinski sends my way. Soon I have a large army of tanks, battlecopters and bombers at my disposal, which begins to sweep over the river. And while it is a slow push to the HQ, I eventually score a domination victory, winning the map on turn 31. And as always, I do it without losing a single unit. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, the final map in the classic campaign turns red, and we are finally going to try out one of the first 4 fabled bonus missions. We've come a long way to get here, and I must admit, going into this challenge, I didn't quite know what to expect from these elusive bonus missions. There's very little footage of them online, just a few posts on various websites complaining about their difficulty, so I was expecting the worst. And even then, those expectations were eclipsed. Mission 16, Shark Strait, is the first of the 4 bonus maps, and if this one is anything to go by, they are all going to be quite insane. Just look at the amount of units the enemy starts out with here. Just to really hammer home what a fight I'm in for, I'm going to show the full length of the first enemy turn. Let it fill you with dread the same way it did me. So yeah, this map is insane. The first thing we have to deal with is the initial onslaught of units coming our way, and there are a lot of them. First, we are attacked by fighters and bombers, then tanks, and then rockets. The fighters aren't much of an issue, but they do prevent us from building air units to counter the initial push. Since anti-air suck in this game, I am forced to build early missiles and flak guns to defend against the bombers, which does work, but it requires a lot of strategic positioning. I also have to deploy a heavy tank to counter the enemy medium tanks, while also trying my best to keep it out of range of the bombers. It takes me a few tries to concoct a good opener, which lets me deal with them in time before the rockets come in range of my base, at which point I'm screwed. But ultimately, I am able to find a sequence of moves which lets me survive. And thus, the first part of the map is now over. Now comes the hard part. While I've been fighting this initial stream of units, Rodzinski has been capturing properties all over the map and deploying a horde of units. And it's about to build up to a critical mass as a swarm of enemy units are coming my way. Before long, the entire peninsula is crawling with blue units everywhere. I am just barely able to secure the northern bridge before the flood hits me, but I am too late to reach the southern one, and as a result, Rodzinski swarms into my territory, creating a highly volatile situation which is simply impossible for me to control. There are simply too many variables here. I'm not able to predict the enemy movement, and I certainly can't think ahead. I just have to kind of react as best as I can. I decide to slowly start backing away from the center, but every turn I spend, the enemy just gets stronger. Rodzinski's income at this point is insane. He's banking around 50,000 funds every single turn, and he spends most of it on units. Luckily, my own income is starting to climb as well, but it's still nowhere near his. I decide that in order to equalize the playing field, I have to try and capture some of his islands, which holds a decent number of properties. This does require me to deal with his naval units, but luckily he doesn't actually have a huge armada at his disposal. Most of his forces are ground units. And once the island property starts coming under my control, Rodzinski's income drops to a much more tolerable level. After a while, I am slowly able to start pushing him back. But every time I think I'm making a little bit of progress, all I need to do is pan over to the other side of the peninsula to see the mass amount of enemy units stationed on the other side. Yes, at this point, my forces have gained multiple promotions and they're starting to become really strong, but the task ahead of me still appears monumental. There is no easy and quick way to wrap up this map. This is going to be a slog through the trenches. I slowly leapfrog all my units forward, supported by artillery, missile, and rocket fire. I put my heavy tanks in front to disincentivize Rozhensky from getting too aggressive, and then I just start to systematically pick off the enemy units one by one. I feel like I'm shoveling snow in a blizzard. For every bit I remove, more just appears in front of me, and I'm starting to wonder if this is just going to be an eternal battle. But as the hours go by, slowly and surely, I start to see a tiny bit of progress. Like a snowball rolling down a mountain, gaining size and speed as it goes, my forces are beginning to gain momentum, and after several hours of game time, I begin the incredibly slow and tedious push towards Rozhensky's HQ. Just to give you an example of how much of a bloodbath this map is, one of my missiles have almost reached max rank. You have no idea how many planes this thing had to shoot down from the skies to get to this point. At this stage of the game, I do have a whole armada of strikers at my disposal, but this poses problems of its own in that I need to constantly watch their fuel levels, which gets very tiresome. In addition to my air and ground forces, I also start an amphibious assault in the south, capturing a bunch of properties by the sea line. Towards the end, I am finally able to score a domination victory, and my goodness, this battle was an absolute slog. I don't even want to know what it would be like to fight one of the elite COs under the same conditions. It takes me 50 days and over 5 hours of game time to beat this map, and for some reason that I'm not really able to comprehend, I do it with no casualties. And thus, we have completed the first campaign, and so we are treated to this adorable little credit sequence. Wait a minute, Shoso Taga? I'm pretty sure that's a translation error. Anyway, you actually get many different credit sequences based on the campaign you're playing, so I'll show more of this later. For now, it is time to move over to the special campaign. At long last, it is time to embark on the new maps, which in my opinion are a lot more fun. For this campaign, I decide to keep the rules mostly the same, but I enable Fog of War. I also decide to go up against a slightly stronger commander in Fonroso. He's a lot less stupid than Rozhensky, and he's also way more aggressive. Don't worry though, you'll get to see some of the elite COs later on. Our first mission is Ridge Island. This seems like your average run-of-the-mill map, but when inspecting the properties, you'll see something new, a lab, the first new mechanic of the special maps. As its description reads, the first player to capture a neutral lab will have the capturing infantry unit turned into a proto-tank, the best land unit in the game. The proto-tank is essentially the ancestor of the neo-tank. It's a heavy tank with superior firepower, movement, fuel, and ammo reserves. It is also slightly more durable, but not by much. Most of the maps in the special campaign come down to whether or not you're able to get the lab on the map before your opponent, but some maps feature multiple labs. I start off the map as usual by building a bunch of infantry and sending them out to capture the neutral properties, but I also deploy an APC as soon as possible to transport a foot soldier out to the lab, which is much closer to the enemy base than mine. Fog of War actually helps in stealing the lab, because the AI in Super Famicom Wars does not cheat in Fog and will get its units trapped. Still, Fonroso is able to interrupt me and delay the lab cap by a turn, but after performing a joint cap, I'm able to secure the lab and the proto-tank is mine. Thankfully, the infantry vanishing does not count as losing a unit, otherwise I'd be in trouble. The proto-tank certainly is a huge boon early on, but it doesn't automatically win the game for me. As tough as it still slowly gets grinded down by luck damage in each encounter, which works the same way in Super Famicom Wars, adding 0 to 9% damage with each encounter, regardless of unit type. And for some reason, the proto-tank is also quite vulnerable to indirect fire, especially rockets, which Fonroso deploys often. Luckily, the lab actually works like a city in Super Famicom Wars, repairing, resupplying, and granting income. So it serves as a nice defensive location to pull my proto-tank back to whenever it takes damage. The rest of the map is actually fairly simple. I keep my prototank in the center while also controlling the 2 entrance points to my territory. Whenever Fonroso charges ahead into the choke point, which he loves to do, I have some units ready to take them out as they arrive. At this point, I'm in a pretty strong position, and I could probably clear this map rather easily if I wanted to. But there is one question I need answers to, and I'm sure you guys are curious as well. How good is a max rank prototank? To answer this, I begin my training montage. So here you have it, folks. This is what a max level prototank looks like. I'm not sure if it's just placebo, but it seemed to me that it levels up faster than other units. Its value is listed as 20,000 for the sake of repairs, but for some reason leveling it up didn't feel like it took very long at all. Maybe it has accelerated experience gains? Would be a fun little bonus. Anyway, here's another quick montage of the prototank annihilating enemy units. Please enjoy. After having my fun, I route Yellow Comet to earn my victory. A fairly simple map all things considered, but it is the first one after all. I ended up playing around for 48 days, which was a bit surprising as it felt a lot shorter. I guess that's just the joy of getting new toys to play with. And of course, I do it without losing a single unit. Rich Island turns green, and we have conquered the first map of the special campaign. Next up is Map 2, Moji Island, a circular island with not one, but 2 labs, both of which should be rather easy for us to capture. There's also a brand new type of terrain here called a forge. This is a property that can't be captured, nor does it resupply or repair troops, but it does grant 5 terrain stars. Anyway, I start off this map as you might expect by building APCs and rushing the 2 labs. The right-hand lab is not difficult to reach at all despite all the forest in the way, it's the left-hand lab I gotta rush for. I also built some early recons to ward away any attempt at interrupting my caps, but it doesn't really end up mattering as Fonroso simply can't reach the labs in time before I do. He's too busy capturing all the cities on the way. I end up getting the prototank in the northeast as well as the one in the southeast, setting me up for a really strong start. However, I foolishly put one of them in range of an artillery, and you can see for yourself just how vulnerable they are to indirect fire. As I stated before, getting 1 or even 2 prototanks doesn't mean you just win the map. Sure, they may do a lot of damage, but they also slowly get grinded down with each engagement due to Super Famicom Wars simultaneous strikes. It's not like getting 2 Neotanks in the early game, it's much worse. I quickly realized I have to bring the rockets down to the choke point if I'm gonna have any chance of breaking through. And with their 4 move, they take forever to reach their destination, but once they do, I begin blasting away at Fonroso's troops, and with a 2-pronged assault from both sides, I force him to split his attention, which lets me chip away at him until he starts crumbling. Soon enough, the road to his HQ is open, and I'm able to move in with my forces and start routing him. It takes me 30 days to conquer this map, and I do it without losing a single unit. Moji Island turns green, and we have beat yet another map. Up next, we have Map 3, Point Stormy. This is interesting, as in the later versions, the positioning of the player and the CPU is reversed. This map is massive, but most of it consists of ocean. There's a lab to the east, which is in the middle point of both players, but aside from a few properties around it, this map doesn't actually feature a lot of income. I start by building a lander to transport my infantry to the lab, but I'm wondering if it may have been faster to just go with an APC or T-copter, as the lander is just so slow in Super Famicom Wars, but I'm locked into it now, so I don't really have a choice. Once I acquire the prototank, I decide to simply leave it in the area to keep the enemy forces occupied while I prepare an assault of air and naval units to go directly for the HQ. I built a little bit of everything: a bomber, a striker, a fighter, a submarine, a cruiser, a battleship, and eventually a lander. My only hope is that the enemy doesn't have too many anti-air units.
Oh no!
Oh, well, as long as he doesn't build a fighter, I should be fine.
Oh no!
God damn it. Okay, that's annoying. At this point, the enemy forces have started arriving in the east, and I have to be careful with how I position my prototank, as we have established many times that it's far from indestructible. I decide that capturing any of the properties north of the lab is not worth it, as my infantry will probably just get picked off from the fog, so I decide to retreat them, but leaving my prototank to guard the area. However, I am ultimately able to block off the enemy harbor with my lander and battleship, and since battleships can target air in this game, I now have a lock on both of the enemy airports. I get a bit of a jump scare as a fighter jumps my bomber from the fog, but luckily the AI fails the coin toss and my bomber survives with 1 HP. After this, the map actually proves to be quite easy, as the AI doesn't utilize all of its bases, making it very easy for me to block them. Before long, I'm able to unload infantry on the shoreline and waltz right up to an undefended HQ and capture it, earning myself a victory. It only took me 20 days to win this, and I do it without losing a single unit. Point Stormy becomes green, and we have once again beaten another map. Then we have map 4, Vision Bridge. This is another choke point heavy scenario with 2 bridges in the center leading to an island where most of the action will take place. This map also has 2 labs, one in the center, but also one right next to the AI's base, meaning we can't get it, which marks the first time we will actually have to face a prototank. This map has something else that's very interesting though, railroads and depots. This is a brand new structure that lets us build a unit worth 30,000, their railgun, also known as the rail turtle in other fan translations. The railgun is essentially the predecessor of the pipe runner from Dual Strike. It's a unit that can move very quickly, but only on a specific terrain, in this case, rails. It can transport 2 land units, but it can only unload them at other depots. It also comes equipped with an indirect gun that can target ground and naval units for quite a lot of damage. They also come equipped with machine guns that are on par with that of a recon. Railguns are quite expensive, and you can only have a single one in play at any time, but if you start with a depot under your control, you get an automatic sum of 30,000 funds added to your bank at the start of the map, allowing you to deploy one immediately if you so wish. Using the rail turtle, I am able to transport 2 infantry to the central island immediately to take over all the surrounding properties, and because I'm now blocking the only depot in the center, I am preventing the enemy from doing the same. Talk about a first turn advantage. However, as I make my way towards the lab, something unexpected happened. Von Rosso sends a recon to interrupt my capture, and since he plunks it down directly on the lab, and I have no vehicles in the area, there's no way for me to get it in time. Knowing that this is just going to make everything more tedious, I simply resign and decide to go for a better opener. On my next attempt, I rush an APC to the southern lab, and this time it works much better. I acquire the prototank and I move it to block the choke point, only for it to encounter another prototank. Wow, I don't think we've ever seen this matchup before. Luckily, because of the simultaneous strikes and the prototank's high base cost, the AI doesn't consider attacking my prototank with his prototank a cost-effective engagement, so it simply stands there, having a proto-stare down. This is nothing but good news for me. Sure, it locks up my prototank, but it also means I don't have to focus on the southern part of the battle and can just focus on the northern one. And because I control the depot, allowing my railgun a great vantage point, I can simply blast any units coming towards me. After locking down the bridge, I begin deploying naval units. This map has no airport, so battleships are going to be my go-to unit. But in Super Famicom Wars, subs are in a constant dived state in Fog of War, and they don't even pay additional fuel to do so. This forces me to deploy cruisers, which are the only units in the game capable of attacking them, and cruisers are bad, like really bad. They take a lot of damage from the subs because of the simultaneous strikes, meaning that after a single attack, they're pretty much useless and you need to pull them back to the base for repairs. Yeah, naval battle in Fog of War and Super Famicom Wars is just not fun. It is incredibly tedious. However, after 40 plus days, I am able to build up a critical mass of battleships into the enemy port, locking down the bases. Once I take down the enemy railgun, the map is practically over. I'm almost able to get my railgun up to rank 3, but I stopped just short of getting it. But as you can see, its damage output is quite impressive even at 2nd rank. It practically one-shots every single ground unit in the game. Anyway, I blast the remaining enemy unit to score myself a rout victory. It takes me a grand total of 44 days, and I do it without losing a single unit. Vision Bridge turns green, and we have cleared yet another map. Up next, we have Map 5, Rivers 4. I guess it's called that because there's 4 rivers? I don't know. This is another one of those geniusly designed maps that sees you taking the longest possible path towards the enemy, at least if you want to use ground units. But as it so happens, this map has airports, so ground units are kinda worthless. So this is gonna be another one of those air unit spam maps. There is a lab in the center which can be reached pretty easily with the T-copters, so I open up with a bunch of them and attempt to capture several of the outlying cities around the map. One thing that really starts to hit me is just how massive this map is. Luckily, there are airports scattered around for refueling purposes, but I'm still gonna have to keep a close eye on my aircraft to avoid having them crash. After capturing the prototank, I decide to use it to go infantry hunting. The prototank has 2 visions, so it's somewhat able to function on its own, but not super well. It still requires some assistance. And I have to be careful not to stray too far away from the lab, lest it be picked off by a bomber or something of the sort. It doesn't take long before I start discovering enemy battlecopters. On this huge map with limited vision, I feel like I'm in a game of peekaboo. Occasionally I'll spot an enemy copter and I'll try not to get struck by it, but when I arrive with anti-copter units myself, I have to try and locate where the enemy battlecopters have gone off to hide. The same occurs with my infantry. This map is just an endless game of whack-a-mole, trying my best to capture properties, but also retreating my own infantry before they can get whacked. To call this fun would be a gross overstatement. This map is more tedious, if anything. In fact, Rivers 4 might be one of the worst designed maps in the entire game. It would be a lot more tolerable without Fog of War, of course, as I wouldn't need to play this game of hide and seek with the enemy air units, so I guess I am partly to blame for the scenario which I have inflicted upon myself, but still, this map is just a snooze fest. Whoever designed it deserves to get fired. I eventually figure out a good way to beat this map that doesn't require too much effort. I simply bring some anti-air from my base into the area where the AI sends its own air units, and with the help of some air support, I'm able to destroy any aircraft that appear. This bleeds the enemy economy dry while my infantry are busy capturing properties all over the map. This eventually earns me a domination victory, and I am just happy that this map is over with. Good riddance. It takes about 27 days and 1 hour of my life that I will never get back, and I do it without losing a single unit. My sanity, on the other hand, has probably taken some losses. This garbage map turns green, and I hope I never have to play it again. Oh well, at the very least, the next map can't possibly be as bad as this one. You know what? I think I will graciously allow my friend to play this one on my behalf.
Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ephraim225, and it looks like I'm needed to play another map. This is truly an honor. Let's see what I'm up against. Bounty River. You're gonna make me play this? Mangs? We're supposed to be friends. Ugh. Fine, let's get this over with. Bounty River has appeared in 5 games in the Wars series and has only ever been a good map in one of them, Days of Ruin, and that's not even due to the level design, it's because the new Navy units in Days of Ruin massively improved the Navy gameplay. In any of the other games, you're forced to move your slow-moving ships through a hilariously long stretch of sea with no combat until you get a lander to the shoal in the opposite corner, allowing you to ferry land units and ignore any further Navy gameplay. But in Super Famicom Wars, Bounty River gives us this. A singular river in an S pattern connecting the HQ, surrounded entirely by mountains. In case Mangs hasn't explained it yet, Navy units can go through rivers in this game, which is completely nonsensical. How are they going up the waterfalls? Oh, and let's just take a moment to note the wonderful prices of Navy units in Super Famicom Wars. 35,000 for a battleship? And even then, all your ships have to pass through one of the longest choke points in the whole series in a game where the supply truck can't refuel them. You must stop at the ports for fuel, and the distance between them is very long. All these mountains make it completely worthless to have any tanks, but I do recommend rushing the labs regardless, just so you don't have to destroy an enemy prototype tank. Tanks are worth almost nothing until you get to the enemy HQ, and there's no airport to make this reasonable. This isn't the worst map in Advance Wars history, but it might just be the most incompetent. I cannot think of anything that would allow them to not notice the very basic issues with the level design. Oh wait! That explains it! So you might wonder if there's some kind of interesting challenge, or maybe I have some unique strategy. No, there isn't. The way to clear Bounty River with any of your sanity left is hilariously boring and still took 45 minutes. I started the map by doing the usual, get infantry out there and start capturing, especially the 2 labs so I don't have prototype tanks stopping me. I'm pretty sure Green Earth is closer to them than Yellow Comet is, and because it's mountains and rivers, infantry can just walk to the lab in the north, you don't need a lander up there. And because it's a river and not the sea, the sooner you get up there, the sooner you can cut off the enemy's navy completely because the ships are stopped by foot soldiers somehow, and in case you're wondering why I don't build mechs, mechs don't move any faster over mountains in this game. Go figure. I guess there is some action because your infantry inevitably come into conflict with theirs while capturing, so make sure you have a massive conga line of infantry going to each city, join capping, and then fending off the enemy from there. A few APCs are good too to add some extra firepower or carry infantry faster. The Navy section is still a pain, however, especially because I eventually reached the unit cap because I wasn't sure how many infantry I would need, and it caused some kind of glitch and a lot of lag. Apparently not even Super Famicom Wars can handle this much at once. Luckily, the enemy did not build any battleships or cruisers at all. They blew their money on submarines that are useless because they can't get past my impenetrable wall of foot soldiers. So it looked like I would have to wait for a cruiser to get all the way around the river so I could get past... What? Domination? Mangs, you turned on domination rules in the Green Earth campaign? Are you... You know what? Actually, this is fine. I'm okay with this. Bounty River cleared with no casualties. Thanks for watching. I'm Ephraim225. See you later, everyone. And good luck to you, Mangs. You're gonna need it.
My goodness, am I glad I didn't have to play that map. Though maybe I shouldn't speak too soon, because the next one is another slog. Terra Maw. This is another absolutely massive map where you start on a huge island, but your opponent has a small one, which feels sort of unfair, but I guess it makes it easier to defend. There's also another smaller island with not 1, but 2 labs. I really want to get my hands on those. I strapped myself in for a long one because this is gonna take a while. I begin by building transports to reach the properties far away from my base, and as soon as I can afford it, I build a lander to snatch the island with the labs. I also bring a pair of anti-air over there since Fonroso might attack the island with air units. I then decide to deploy a cruiser because I know this map will have submarines, and then I deploy several submarines of my own to go lander hunting. The idea is that if I'm able to sink the enemy landers fast enough, I might not even have to worry about a land assault. But I end up being too late, and Fonroso actually deploys anti-air, medium tanks, and infantry on my island backed up by air units, which is actually really scary. He also captures my harbor, which is very annoying since I need to repair my cruisers who always gets damaged dealing with enemy subs. It takes a while for the situation to calm down, but once I'm able to gain control over the waters between our islands, I quickly reach a point where I'm able to just shoot down anything he sends my way. The AI is not good at dealing with fog of war on larger maps. It gets its units trapped all the time, which is pretty hilarious. Soon enough, I'm able to begin my assault on the main island, and this is, as usual, a slow but risky process. When you do a Deathless challenge, you have to be really cautious about landing units on an island, since you have no idea what's waiting for you in the fog. The first assault I deem too risky, so I decide to pull back and wait for my prototanks to arrive, and once they do, it gets much easier. I'm eventually able to capture the HQ, which grants me a victory, and after 48 long days, I'm finally done with this map. And as you can see, I do it without losing a single unit. Terra Maw turns green, and we have cleared yet another map. Next, we have Map 8, Land's End, and this is another one I played before on the channel during my 420 special. This is another map featuring railroads, and this time they actually connect the 2 HQs. This means that whoever can secure the central station is going to win, so naturally that's what I go for. But first, I spend some time ferrying infantry towards the neutral properties, which gives the enemy time to mobilize. I'm a little overconfident that my railgun alone is going to keep me alive, but I overestimate its durability. It's a tough unit, but if enough tanks shoot at it, it will go down, and that's exactly what happens, forcing a reset. On my second attempt, I try a different approach. I forego transporting infantry and instead plunk my railgun directly down at the central depot, and this works like a charm. This way I'm able to bottleneck the entire enemy army coming through the mountains. And even though the tanks can attack my railgun at close range, they seldom deal more than 2 HP of damage, which is easily repaired on the depot itself, though it drains my funds quite a bit with the railgun's insane cost of 30,000. But it doesn't matter, this way I'm able to completely lock down the only entrance to my territory, meaning I'm I'm free to focus solely on my naval assaults. With the AI hopelessly barging his units into my railgun meat grinder, Ponderoso doesn't have much funds left over to produce any naval units, and the few he does produce are easily killed. I have too much fun with those. Anyway, shortly afterwards, I captured the HQ to score my victory. It takes me 44 days, though I could have done it a lot sooner, and I do it without losing a single unit. Land's End turns green, and we've cleared yet another map. Then we arrive at Mial's Hope. I don't know who Mial was and what he was hoping for, but it sure as hell couldn't be this map, because once again we got a massive sized island with the tiny choke point in the center. Why oh why did the map designers insist on doing this every time? There's also a lab, and while it is closer to the enemy than us, we can still grab it with a T-copter, so that's what I do. Then I do the true and tested Super Famicom Wars special. It's hilarious how many maps you can cheese with a single battlecopter. Well, at least until the enemy decides to deploy a fighter. However, at this point, it has given us enough time to set up a wall of rockets, and then we simply have to wait as the AI stupidly barges its troops into our line of fire. We do this enough, and the rockets level up, increasing their potency. This is a true and tested recipe at this point. It's almost sad how easy some of the maps in this game are due to the design and the limitations of the AI. It really makes me wish I could toggle the COs I face mid-campaign so I could fight some of the stronger elite COs on the weaker maps without having to face them on the secret ones, but the game simply won't allow for that. Oh well. Truth be told, I don't have much to say about this map, so I'm just gonna show some footage of me beating it with this amazing Game Boy Wars music playing in the background. Well, that was fun. 24 days to win, no casualties, map turns green, yada yada. Then we have map 10, 16 Reefs. That's odd. I only count 2 reefs at the most. Fake news. This map is wacky. It's a pure air battle, as there are no harbors. It reminds me a lot of the Advanced Wars 2 campaign map Sea for All. Yes, technically that was purely an air and naval battle, but no one ever deployed naval units on that map, so the concept is the same. Going into this, I had no idea whether or not this was going to be a complete face roll or one of the hardest maps of the challenge thus far. I knew from the get-go that the AI would waste a lot of money on useless ground units, but that also means it might be harder to attack the island later on, as it might be crawling with anti-air. Furthermore, with just air units who all attack each other simultaneously, I know I will have to constantly repair my units, which is going to be annoying. Luckily, there are 2 airports in the center of the map, and taking these as fast as possible is the primary objective. I take the northern island easily enough, but the AI offers some resistance in the south, though not much, as I end up taking it pretty quickly afterwards. Then, my strategy is quite simple. I create a cluster of fighters and strikers and have them hover around the 2 reefs. And then, when the AI inevitably crashes into them, I shoot them down and rotate out my damaged aircraft with healthy ones, all while keeping an eye on fuel reserves. This strategy is monotonous and tedious, but it is reliable. Since the AI doesn't have enough income on this map to build more than a single fighter every 2 turns, I won't really have to deal with many aircraft at once, so the chance of losing a unit is basically 0. I repeat this process until I start earning some ranks on my aircraft, and then when the time comes to attack the island, I'm hoping that during all this time, it hasn't been completely covered in units. And to my joy, there's only a single anti-air and missile there, meaning there probably wasn't even a need for me to spend as much time as I did ranking up my fighters. I easily rout the enemy, earning myself a victory, and it only took a measly 48 days. Wow. Oh, and I also did it without losing a single unit. The 16 Reefs turns green, and we have cleared yet another map. Up next is map 11, Kita Strait. And let me tell you, this is another wonky one. We start out with 2 forts right next to our HQ for some reason, then we have a railroad, but this is an isolated railroad that goes nowhere, and our opponent is located on another island south of ours. This kind of feels like one of those Civ games where you and your opponent starts on different islands and you don't meet each other until the late game. Until then, it's like you're both playing a single player game together. That's Kita Strait. For some reason, I can't afford my initial railgun on the first turn, so I have to base skip to get it. But soon enough, I'm using it to transport infantry all across my island and capture whatever properties I can. I built some early subs in an attempt to hunt some landers, but I soon run into enemy subs, as well as a cruiser, and I have to avoid them until I get more funds to deal with them. Ponderoso eventually tries to unload a rocket and a medium tank on my shores, but my railgun is in perfect position to repel the attack, so it fails pretty spectacularly. There's also a lab on my island, so I even have a prototank for defense. So this mission really is laughably easy. All I have to do is build up my forces while repelling landers, which isn't hard to do. Soon I have a whole armada of units killing them as they leave the safety of their harbor, and once I have a big enough force, I just attack the HQ with a combination of lander units and battleship support. I know it seems like I'm kinda rushing through some of these maps, but many of them really just aren't all that difficult due to the archaic game design of Super Famicom Wars, and Kita Strait is one of them. After 41 days, I capture the HQ, and I do it without losing a single unit. Kita Strait turns green, and we've cleared yet another map. Next up is map 12, Alara Range, another war room map from the later games that is quite different in Super Famicom Wars. Alara Range is the first map that sees the enemy starting out with a railroad which we can't access, and it also has a long river that ships can sail up. However, for some funny reason, even though we don't start next to a depot, we still get the 30,000 funds added into our bank at the start of the map, which means we can spend big right away. I go all out on transports, getting an APC, a T-copter, and a lander to try and get as much map control as possible, but I also build a recon to scout what the enemy is doing. Then I deploy an early game fighter to hunt enemy T-copters. All very standard so far. I rush my APC down to the depot because I'm curious whether or not the game will let me build a railgun in it. Technically speaking, it is the closest depot to my HQ even though it is far away. However, I quickly find out that the depot is useless. I can't deploy anything from it, so that means no railgun for me this map. There's a lab on this map far to the left, but it's isolated, meaning that my prototank can't get off it on its own. That's why I built a lander earlier. I plan to pick it up and buzz it somewhere more useful. I move my fighter down trying to trap enemy units while using my recon to interrupt enemy captures. So far, there's been very little sighting of the enemy. I also use my lander to get some rockets closer to the front line, since this map is Choke Point City, and we all know just how well the AI deals with those. It doesn't take long for me to capture the southwestern corner of the map. I'm expecting air units to show up, so I have an anti-air on standby, but no enemy units appear to be arriving just yet. This is a very odd map. It feels like all I'm doing is just hovering my units around the mountains waiting for something to show itself, and because of the narrow landmass, it's incredibly hard to get scouts down to gain vision, so most of the time I'm just in the dark. Playing Fog of War in this kind of challenge is very tedious, because at random intervals, fighters will just jump out from hiding and take shots at my battlecopters. Luckily, this one failed the coin toss, and my copter is left with 1 HP. Phew. Normally, building battlecopters is a great way to cheese maps like these in Super Famicom Wars, but for once the AI actually plays well, deploying anti-air and other units to ward them away, and I have no choice but to retreat. Meanwhile, down in the south, the first enemy tank has shown itself, but my rocket arrives just in time to help defend the area. Rail tracks are very slow for vehicles to move over, so this will be a great defensive vantage point. Soon, enemy bombers start showing up, but my fighters are ready to intercept them, though every time I counterattack, there's always a risk of an enemy anti-air, missile, or fighter standing by in the fog for a counterattack, which is very terrifying. 17 days into this map and I feel like I've hardly made progress. I take small W's here and there, but the map's layout just prevents me from pushing forward. When you can't lose a single unit, you have to play extra defensive, and when the map is already very defensive in nature, it results in a complete slog. After a while, my infantry, who has been trudging through the mountains for a while, starts arriving in the wests, and this gives me crucial vision over the enemy's movement. Just like in the newer games, you get 5 extra bonus vision from putting an infantry on a mountain, and while it's not enough to see everything that's going on, it sure helps a lot. Meanwhile, my lander is on its way to pick up the prototank, and I have a bit of a devious plan going on. You may notice the submarine cruising down the river. My gamble is that the enemy won't have much in its base, and that maybe with a prototank and infantry and a few other support units, I might be able to go for a cheeky HQ cap. It's worth a try, right? I can always retreat if things look too dicey. On day 21, I commence my amphibious operation. I drop off my proto and a heavy tank a bit away from the enemy HQ, just in case there's a railgun there. Everywhere else I've made a little bit of progress, but not by much. I'm still inching my units forward very slowly, hoping to not get one of them sniped. After doing a bit of harassing behind enemy lines, sadly and predictably, my tanks attract the attention of a bomber, which I really should have seen coming. Luckily, I have a rank 2 fighter that has become very adept at sniping aircraft, but it's just barely out of range. I have to retreat my tanks, hoping that the enemy doesn't have vision of them. I realize that my little HQ cap operation is probably not going to work out. However, it has yielded some other results. While I have been unsuccessful in taking down the enemy headquarters, I have been successful in drawing the enemy attention away from the front lines, and this is allowing me to push on all fronts. Soon I'm advancing my units forward at a rapid pace, and I quickly take over the southern rail station. At this point, I'm starting to wonder why I still haven't encountered the enemy railgun. Did Von Rosso even deploy one? Before I can ask any more questions, I captured the last property needed for a domination victory. I guess some mysteries are better left unanswered. I end up beating Alara Range in 32 days, which is a lot quicker than some of my other maps, but it still felt a lot longer due to the layout of the map and how much I had to think each turn. And of course, as always, I do it without losing a single enemy unit. Alara Range turns green, and we've cleared yet another map, getting closer to the finish line now. Up next is map 13, Sprinkle Islands, a pure naval map. Were it not for Fog of War, I would have rejoiced, but as we've already established, Fog of War naval battles in this game are incredibly annoying due to the subs being in a constantly dived state, leading to a game of hide-and-go-seek that feels like you're searching for needles in haystacks, with your cruisers taking constant damage and having to be pulled back for repairs. Luckily, because the AI sucks at transporting its troops, I'm able to capture practically every single island on the map except for the top left one, and even that one I'm able to steal the lab, obtaining a prototank which makes it very hard for the AI to get any kind of foothold. Everywhere else, I'm just doing my best to balance out my naval composition. Due to the rock, paper, scissor format of naval warfare, with battleships beating cruisers, cruisers beating submarines, and submarines beating battleships, you can't just deploy a single unit to win the game. You need all 3 of them, and you need to make sure they move together in small groups so they're always ready to handle whatever the AI might throw at you. It's not like with air-dominated maps where you can pretty much just produce strikers to win. Naval warfare is a lot more complex, and by complex I mean extremely tedious. Normally, I love naval warfare, but I realized that Super Famicom Wars lacks a certain type of terrain that I took for granted in the newer games. Reefs. They simply don't exist here. This means there are no safe places to hide your battleships, and that makes them sitting ducks for enemy submarines. And it just makes naval maps seem open and desolate. I guess that is an accurate way to depict the open sea, but I'm convinced that the reason naval warfare has gotten such a bad rap in the Wars games is because the developers never took their time to properly implement naval terrain. Days of Ruin did an effort by adding some new terrain types and reworking naval combat as a whole, but it still wasn't enough. Later on, games games like Wargroove took it a step further by adding sea-exclusive properties that needed to be captured by amphibious infantry, which was a great touch. It made the water actually worth fighting over since there were resources to be had there, unlike most of the Wars games where naval warfare is simply an overlooked afterthought. Anyway, I'm ranting here, but that's only because I've run out of interesting things to say about this map. It's not difficult, just tedious, and it takes me 40 days to finally approach the enemy island. Once I start closing in on Fonroso's HQ, I start laying waste to his production facilities with battleships. There sadly aren't enough properties on the map to win a domination victory without taking at least a few on the mainland, so I decide to win by routing him instead. It takes me a grand total of 48 days to win, and I do it without losing a single unit. The Sprinkle Islands turns green, and we've cleared yet another map. After all this hard work, I think it's time to go on a vacation together to the Egg Islands. This vacation paradise features chill islands where you can build up your forces in peace away from your noisy neighbors. Egg Island is one of those maps that looks like it's going to be a huge pain to play, but in reality it is one of the chillest maps in the game. It has no airports, so naval units are going to be needed to win here. The AI starts on a massive island, but the properties on this island are spread far apart, which means it's going to be busy capturing them all for a while, giving us a lot of time to build up our forces. Meanwhile, we start on a much smaller island, but we have a larger one just underneath us with tons of properties and a lab, and there's no way the AI is going to reach it before us, so we can take our time. The AI does have a lab on its island too, and I try a cheeky opener to see if I'm able to steal it away with a lander, but it is simply too slow, and by the time I get to the lab, it's already being captured. And since there's no way I'm gonna be able to evacuate my infantry out of there, I simply resign and try again. On my second attempt, I take it way easier, and I don't attempt any cheesy rushing strats. I simply take over all the properties on the southern island, which nets me a nice income, and this allows me to start deploying an armada of naval units. I have my ships hunker down in the waters between the two landmasses and simply order them to obliterate any units that come close. I even drop off some recons on the northern island to scout for any attack coming from that direction, but the AI never gets around to it. It just continues to idly send naval units to their doom, which wastes resources and grants me several promotions. I even get a battleship to max rank, which takes a long time, but I just wanted to see how they get, and they are actually a lot less impressive than I thought. It doesn't even one-shot most units, but it's still pretty neat, I guess. Anyway, once I feel confident enough, I move my entire armada towards the enemy HQ in the south. I bring in a couple of ground units on my landers, like some rockets for additional support, and then I just start blasting. It's kinda anticlimactic, but I really do mean it when I say this is the chillest map. It takes forever, but there's nothing really going on, just a slow cruise to victory. I capture the enemy HQ in, a mere 85 days. Hey man, if it works, it works. And I do it without losing a single unit. The Egg Islands turn green, and that's another map cleared. We are one map away from unlocking another secret level, and when I first looked upon Duo Falls, I had a growing suspicion that this was going to be an annoying one, but little could prepare me for the insane amounts of trolling this game would subject me to. Right off the bat, Duo Falls is a map centered around a railroad going in the middle of it, and even on day one it makes fun of you. Your starting income? 29,000. Do you know what a railgun costs? 30,000. So you can't get it on day one, no matter how much you want to. Anyway, this is a very narrow map with a lab in the middle, and it is easy enough to get it, but once the prototank is on the field, the enemy bombards me with vehicles. Luckily, it won't attack my prototank head-on because it doesn't deem the encounter cost-effective, so the prototank is mostly left alone, but the enemy units still dart past it, threatening my other units in the back. I try to use my railgun to its maximum capacity, transporting as many troops as I am able to, but I also really need it to attack because there's so many vehicles coming through. Once I'm able to beat back the initial onslaught of the enemy, what follows is the stall match of the century. Duo Falls is a very high-income map, and it funnels two massive grand armies into a 3-tile choke point in the center, one of which are made up of railways. Even with a horde of rockets barraging the enemy as they come towards me, there is no amount of damage I can do that will stem the flow of units coming towards me. 21 days in and the stall has not improved one bit, so in a desperate push I decide to charge forward and see if I can at least take out some of the enemy's indirects. But soon after moving forward, I am greeted by a swarm of vehicles, rockets, and a railgun. There is no way I'm going to be able to force my way through here, so I surrender and I decide to try something else. On my second attempt, I tried to use my railgun offensively. I move it as fast as I can towards the enemy, not moving it back to pick up reinforcements once I unload the initial infantry. And instead, I tried to gain an early advantage with that and my prototank working together. However, I'm severely lacking in vision, and while I have a recon, it is so slow due to the rails, it's impossible to get it into position. Furthermore, because my railgun is now being used to attack and not to transport troops, it takes the rest of my units ages to reach the front lines. Furthermore, Fonroso's medium tank rolls maximum luck and inflicts 5 HP of damage to my railgun, which is enough to destroy it. Yeah, hyper offense is not going to cut it on duo falls. I'll need to rethink my strategy and figure out something else. On my third attempt, I go back to the stall strategy, but this time I have an idea. What if I tried to attack his railgun with one of my rockets? My only option is to wait for the railgun to eventually move away, but it never freaking does. It just stays there all the time. You'd think Fonroso would want to use it to transport troops, but he just doesn't want to. He just keeps that damn railgun in place, and if I move into its range, it will shoot at me. At a loss for better ideas, I decide to just hold my ground and keep shooting until my rockets level up. And on day 34, something amazing happens. The railgun finally moves away from the depot, and I have a brief opportunity to gain some ground. I can't move too fast because of the damn railways, but I am able to charge ahead and plonk down a heavy tank on the depot. At least now I'm blocking Fonroso from moving the railgun back. I even get some infantry up there and start capturing the properties, but once I'm done with that, a gruesome sight awaits me. On the other side of the river is a horde of vehicles, and it slowly starts to dawn on me that this map is far from over. We're just entering Act 2. Previously, I had to contend with a 3-tile choke point. Now I have to funnel my entire army through a 1-tile choke point, with enemy indirects and a railgun on the other side. This must be how the soldiers of World War I felt when they were doing trench warfare. 75 days have gone by and most of my rockets are at max rank, so leveling them up further feels pointless. But I've still not been able to make any progress across the river. There's simply too many indirects at the other side and I'm starting to wonder if this is it. Is this where I'm gonna get soft-locked right before the end? Not now. Not when I'm so close to the finish line. I refuse to give up here, so I start to slowly inch into enemy territory, 1 tile at a time, taking care not to expose myself too much. And on day 87, I'm finally able to break into the enemy base and get one of my tanks in range of that damned railgun, which has been making my life so difficult for so long. Now I can at long last advance into the enemy base, but I'm not going to fall this close to the finishing line. I just need to be very careful with how I position my troops. Besides, I don't even need to attack the HQ. I've counted the properties on the map, and all I need to do is to capture 3 more cities on this side of the map. And on day 89, I do just that, scoring myself a long-awaited domination victory. This was the trolliest, most annoying and tedious map I have played in this challenge so far, and it wasn't even one of the 4 secret maps. No casualties, unless you count the blood vessels in my brain. Duo Falls turns green, and we have just unlocked the secret Green Earth mission. At long last, we have reached the secret Green Earth campaign map, Countdown, and out of all the 4 secret maps, this is apparently the hardest of them all. Remember when I said that one of these maps is said to be the advanced campaign rivals map of Super Famicom Wars? This is the one. With that in mind, it feels only right that we save this challenge for last. There are 2 other secret maps aside from this one, the Blue Moon map, Royal Channel, and the Yellow Comet map, aptly named Final Mission. You unlock these by beating either the classic or new campaign as the opposing sides. Since this is basically going to be a rerun of the 2 prior campaigns, I'm going to skip over them as I don't think it's going to be terribly interesting to watch. However, I decided that this time around, it's time to showcase the elite COs. The three elite COs in this game, Caroline, Billy Gates, and Mr. Yamamoto, are unique in that they have day-to-day powers, something every other CO would come to possess in the later games. In addition to their powers, all of them have the elite AI, meaning they play at the highest level the CPU is capable of. The elite COs themselves are quite unbalanced, even against each other. Caroline is by far the weakest, while Yamamoto is the strongest, and Billy Gates falls somewhere in between the two depending on the map. For the Blue Moon map, I decided to play as Billy Gates versus Caroline. Even though she is the weakest of the elite COs, Caroline is still pretty scary to go up against. She gains increased luck damage on the offense and reduces enemy luck damage on the defense, which may not sound that great, but with Super Famicom Wars simultaneous strikes, it means she always comes out ahead in even engagements. Let us see how scary she is on the Blue Moon secret map, Royal Channel. Well, that is terrifying. On day 1, we have 3 battleships, 2 fighters, and 2 bombers within striking distance of our HQ. Luckily, I know the AI of Super Famicom Wars pretty well at this point. It doesn't like moving into the range of my units, and Caroline is no exception. So I build a fighter and an anti-air, which successfully wards away her units, for now. Her battleships, on the other hand, are still cruising towards me, and they will not be deterred. And if they are allowed to lock down my airports and bases, I'm in big trouble. So I have to deploy a submarine. Billy Gates' bonus income is a godsend here, as it allows me to deploy a sub a whole turn before I otherwise would be able to. And the fact that subs can't be targeted by battleships once they come out of the port is also incredibly nice. There is a cruiser on the way, however, so I need to do as much damage as I can before it gets here. At this point, the only facility I can utilize is this airport right here, as everything else is locked down by the battleships. So I just decide to deploy a second sub, as it's the only thing I can really do. While all this is going on, Caroline is capturing tons of properties all over the map, and I'm worried that she's eventually going to score a domination victory before long. The sheer amount of properties on the map is a blessing though, as that increases the amount of total properties she needs to cap before she can get there, so I have some time to work with still. The most crucial part of this mission is to survive the initial assaults, and thanks to Caroline's defensive AI, it is actually very possible to stall her off. I just have to be careful with how I position my troops. However, shortly after I think things start to look up, I am reminded of how a small day-to-day power can prove fatal. Normally, cruisers cannot one-shot subs in this game, as they have 90 base damage against them, so even with a maximum luck roll of 9, they never get the killing blow. However, Caroline has 5% extra luck, so her cruisers have a 50-50 chance of one-shotting subs, which is exactly what happens to me, forcing a restart. I told you this power would be troublesome. On my next try, I'm starting to figure out how this map works. Everything that goes on in the distance is pointless. It's basically background noise that you can tune out. The only thing that matters is what happens directly around your HQ. In addition to the initial force that will arrive at your HQ right away, Caroline also has 2 medium tanks very close by, and they will arrive within a few days. All I need to do is to deploy exactly as many units I need to deal with these initial units. If I can just get through that, I should be fine. I have a pretty big economy, boosted further by Billy Gates' extra 10,000 per day, so I am confident that I'll be able to push out units to deal with whatever she sends at me later. I reset about 4 or 5 times to get the most optimal build order, and eventually I am able to find a strategy that survives the initial assault with no losses by using infantry to soak up a lot of Caroline's vehicles. Luckily, the AI of Super Famicom Wars really doesn't care for finishing off units and tends to spread itself out, which is very exploitable. Soon enough, I have control over my own base and I'm able to wipe out most of her units, and now the counterattack can begin. I deploy a lot of transport units and I rush south with all haste in an attempt to capture as many red cities as I can. Hopefully, I'm going to be able to do so before Caroline scores a domination victory, as she is still capturing properties all over the map. What follows next is just an incredibly slow and tedious cleanup phase. It kinda dawns on me that these secret maps are only really difficult for the first week or two. After that, it's just a slow trudge to the finishing line. All I do is slowly build up my economy until I eventually amass a horde of strikers, and then use those strikers to assault the AI. Most of the properties that Caroline has is in the northern part of her own island, and this place is actually completely undefended. As long as I move in other units towards her HQ, she just masses them up in a ball waiting for me to strike, but of course, I never do. While I do this, I just transport a bunch of infantry over to her island and start taking over the unguarded properties. And since I've now also taken all the properties on my island, this eventually leads to a domination victory. It takes me 34 days to win, and I do it without losing a single unit. The Royal Channel turns blue, and we have cleared the Blue Moon secret map. It was actually a lot easier than I thought. Up next, we have the third secret map, the Final Battle. Something tells me this was probably meant to be played last, but it's not the most difficult, so we're not gonna do that. For this map, I really wanted to see the ultimate CO in action, but I sure as hell don't want to play against him, so I'll play as him instead. Maybe it's a bit cheeky, but I really want to feel the true power of Mr. Yamamoto at least once during this playthrough. Starting with tier 3 promotions is just too amazing after all the hell that I've been through, so that's what I'm doing, no complaints. The Final Battle is the first secret map so far that does not feature any naval units. It does have a huge ground and air army along with railroads though. Size-wise, it is also probably one of the biggest maps I have seen thus far, and the army coming our way is pretty terrifying. Or is it? The enemy army charging us right away is pretty terrifying, but it does have one crucial weakness. I only see a single fighter coming towards us. And that gives me an idea. If I build infantry, they're just going to be mogged. But what if I don't produce anything? With an income of 9,000, it takes me a little while before I'm able to save up for a fighter, but since I'm Mr. Yamamoto, I'm easily able to counter the enemy fighter due to simultaneous strikes. And once I do, there's no more anti-air around my base. Sure, 2 missiles are making their way towards me, but they take forever to get into position with their 4 move. A few days later, and I can afford my first bomber, and since there is nothing threatening it, I can begin going ham on the ground units. The 2 extra promotions makes the bomber pretty much able to one-shot everything, which is very nice. With only 9,000 income, it does take me a lot of time before I can produce each new bomber, but thankfully, the enemy AI is not programmed to block my airports, it just sits on top of my bases. With each new bomber I deploy, I am able to clear out a little more out of my base, and while more units keep arriving, my killing power increases rapidly with each turn that passes. Soon, I have enough of an air force to start my spring cleaning, and finally, after about 20 plus days, I am able to actually start deploying ground units and capture some of the properties in the area. At this point, the enemy's economy is ridiculous. It is so massive he can't even spend most of his funds, and he hit unit cap a while ago. So I don't actually need to destroy all the units coming my way, just the ones that are an immediate threat to me. Leaving uncrucial units like supply trucks and APCs alive actually serves me because it means the enemy just can't reinforce as much. The beauty of going mass air in this game is that there's very little that can actually challenge it. Anti-air aren't really that threatening, the only thing I gotta watch out for are enemy strikers and fighters, and because I'm Mr. Yamamoto, I tend to come out ahead in those engagements. The only thing I gotta watch out for is my fuel, since I only have so many airports capable of resupplying my aircraft. And because of this, I am eventually forced to mix some ground units into my composition. I deploy a lot of heavy tanks and also a lot of recons. You'd be surprised at how effective they are with that plus 40% base firepower. It makes them really adept at clearing away enemy infantry. In other areas of the map, my infantry is moving in a giant conga line, capturing any properties in their vicinity, as the AI isn't really good at defending properties it has previously captured. After what feels like an eternity, I am finally able to start moving outside my base, and I take over the enemy airport, which gives me another avenue to refuel and resupply my aircraft. After another eternity, I am able to take over the northern rail station, which prevents Billy Gates from funneling reinforcements there with his railgun. Then I take the central airport, giving me yet another avenue to refuel my aircraft. Soon afterwards, I take the southern rail station, and now Billy Gates is not really able to bring any units to either the north or the south. At this point, my army starts to consist mostly of strikers. They're just the most versatile and fast unit in the game, so I prefer using them. The others simply take too long to arrive to the front lines. Whenever my strikers are injured, I combine them together and send them back to fuel whenever it is needed. At this point, I've gotten real good at managing my aircraft's fuel levels and making sure they all make it back in time before they crash. However, even though I've gained a lot of ground, this is where the map really starts slowing to a crawl, because Billy Gates has practically infinite money at his disposal, and the closer I get to his base, the more unit I have to deal with. However, slowly and surely, very slowly and very surely, I am eventually able to reach his base and block off all of his production facilities. And eventually, I'm even able to rout him off the map. This has to be a new record. 97 days. And I do it without losing a single unit. And no, you are not seeing that wrong. I actually deploy over 61 strikers. At long last, the final battle is over. But was it truly the final battle? Oh no. Oh no, ladies and gentlemen. Now we are truly ready to take on the true final battle. Oh boy, it sure has been a long journey, but we are finally here. The final secret mission countdown. Prior to starting this challenge, this is the map that I was warned about. I've heard that it was Advanced Campaign Rivals on steroids, and now I'm curious to find out, is it really as bad as people say? Due to the fog of war, it's hard to tell exactly just how much the AI starts out with, but I can only assume it's a decent chunk. Still, there's nothing to be done but play this map and see how bad it is with my own eyes. At the very least, the first enemy phase should give us a decent indication of the enemy forces coming our way. Oh, look at that. Bombers appearing on our base on day 2? At least Rivals gave you like 3 or 4 days before doing that. I can see why people dislike this map now, but let's just keep playing and see how it goes. So yeah, by day 3 my HQ is swarming with air units and there's an army of vehicles approaching from my left flank. They'll be upon me in a few more days. This is pretty bad, but surely it's not Advanced Campaign Rivals levels of bad. All I need to do is perfect my opener and try to have a response for whatever the AI sends my way. If I can just survive the first couple of weeks, I should be able to bounce back. After a few attempts, I decide to ditch the rail turtle as it's not worth the money, seeing as it can't protect me from the early game air units. So I deploy a pair of fighters instead and try to take out the bombers and give them some missile support. Once Fonderoso counterattacks, I can shoot his fighters down from the skies. Of course, once the vehicle starts arriving from the west, I get pounded, but that's solely because I'm fixated on dealing with the air threat. All I need to do now is to optimize my opener so I can have a response for both. And soon enough I managed to do just that. I deploy a mix of units capable of fending off the air attack from the south and the vehicles from the west. We are now at day 5 and things are actually starting to look a little better. I really don't see what the problem is. This map really doesn't seem all that difficult to me. What? Wait. What? The AI wins the domination victory on day 5? You can't be serious. This makes Combai's Error look like a field training map. How the hell am I supposed to fight off a two-pronged attack while keeping all my units alive and somehow prevent captures before day 5? That is absolutely insane. There is no way this can be legit. Is this why this map is called Countdown? Because it counts down from 5? In order to see what is going on, I decided to load this map in without fog just to see what the enemy is doing. And as you can see, he starts with infantry on my island, as well as all over the map, and he begins capturing properties immediately. The only way I see this being doable is to somehow deploy an aircraft and send it west and try to interrupt the captures before they can happen. But doing that while defending against everything else just seems impossible. Now, I'm not one for giving up easily. I decided to give it a few more attempts, and this time around I'm able to get a striker into my early game composition and send it west to interrupt what captures I can. But on day 5, this is the state of the map. There are yellow units everywhere, and as soon as a fighter shows up to kill my striker in the west, I give in to despair. This just seems overwhelming and completely unfair. I'm not even able to survive the first week. I just die. This map is just evil. I don't understand how they thought this was okay. I'm sorry to say this, but even NH, the guy who did Rivals Deathless, would not be able to defeat this map. I see absolutely no way this can be done. It is 100% utterly and completely impossible.
Did someone say impossible? Pass me the controller, Mengs. I'll show them. Hey everyone, NH here. For those who don't know me yet, I'm some random dude known to have beaten every impossible challenge Mengs made, and to have recently proved that Rivals was indeed possible deathless, without snow thrown into the mix, while also breaking a new record on that map to boot, cutting by 3 days the previous record. Following that, Mengs and Ephraim asked me to look into another unsolvable puzzle, Countdown. That map really lives up to its name, huh? As Mengs just showed you, being on a tight timer to stop the infantries on the left, while having to deal with 34 units right away? Forget about deathless, just beating it normally seems insane already. Rivals was hard, you said? Well, this is exactly the kind of puzzle I like to tackle, and Mengs knew that, excited to see what I would be able to cook. But I never played this specific game before. I knew nothing about the units, the AI, anything. So, can't really expect too much, right? Right? Well, 3 days later, I came up with what you're about to see. Both couldn't believe it, and trust me, I wasn't expecting this too. So, after breaking some egg's mind, let me break this one down for you. If we take away all the captures you would never be able to stop, this leaves us with a leeway of only 2 properties. You would think this is barely manageable, and you can always let the AI capture just 1 property to give you some room to breathe. Well, tough luck. You can't do that, or you will lose to another hidden time limit we have yet to talk about. Day 9. There is a port southwest the CPU will capture. It's technically possible to stop this one, but you would be taking a huge risk with no vision and all the dangerous units that tend to be around the way. So yeah, you are pretty much forced to completely stop the infantries from getting any property on the upper left side, while also trying to survive an onslaught of units. Insane. Let's see what we can do. Well, with that much beginning funds at our disposal, we will go with a bomber, a medium and a light tank for the left side units, while that T-copter's job is to bait any fighter. That way they don't go for our bomber instead. And we will use 2 flak
Okay.
Guns to stop the air units. 3 would be perfect, but we can't. So we will go with building the extremely bad anti-air unit next turn instead to help a bit. From there, we just attack as much as we can, leaving most units at 1 HP to make sure we don't have to deal with them ever again, while stopping the captures at the same time. Build order is also important, even if it doesn't seem so at first. During day 3, for example, we built the infantry on the right first because the AI will move towards the unit placed first in memory, if multiple units are positioned at the same distance than the AI's unit. And since this copter is the one moving towards any of these infantries and giving vision of either to the AI's bomber, that way we made sure the bomber would move in range of our indirects instead of going to the left, outside the 3 tiles range of our discount missiles. Next, day 4 is the first instance of me playing with fire. I want to be able to blow that fighter, and I'm a bit forced to do it now, so I had to use our first T-copter to do the job, which means risking a death if we get a bad luck roll. Thankfully, RNG is extremely predictable and easy to manipulate in this game, and you yourself can just quick save and load before any action to reroll RNG, if you wanted to do the same and have the best luck rolls possible. Following that, we keep baiting and injuring units, and by day 6, we finally get rid of the infantries, making us safe from a domination win. Well, we still have one more roadblock to deal with next. A medium tank, 2 mechs, and 2 battleships are coming from the middle. And don't you begin thinking these mechs are the lesser threat. They could easily capture one of your properties if you are not careful, as you have to deal with the battleships, the tank, and some air units still at the same time. Thankfully, a heavy tank, then an artillery, will be enough for the opposing tank and mechs. A sub would be perfect for the battleships, but we don't have enough money yet, so we will have to stall them for now. And for that, infantries are the most cost-effective and easy units to bait their attacks with as long as we need to. From there, it's actually pretty easy to just stall, build an army, trust nobody, and win. Landers aren't coming anytime soon to send more land units, as well as you won't have to deal with more battleships, and air units will now use too much fuel and be forced to refuel almost immediately upon reaching your HQ, while also fighting for a single spot on the closest airport available, making them pretty much not a threat too, and even having some of them crash at some point. Don't get me wrong though, the early game is still hell, but had Mengs bashed his head a few days against the wall, I know he certainly could have found a similar way to stall this map. Though it would devolve into an even longer stall than the one he had to go through already. And we are not here to make an omelette anyway, nor make you watch a 90+ turns run. So we haven't talked yet about the T-copters going on an adventure. We have 2 there for a reason. Remember when I said the AI targets the units placed first in memory? Well, our 1 HP T-copter was built first, so when choosing between 2 units, this fighter will go for this one instead of the other. Yep, you can already see where this is going. Oh, and the third also happened before in its own way, being put there during day 5 to bait the cruiser up so it wouldn't be able to reach the other T-copters later. And while we keep injuring most units coming our way, not killing or making them join together so we stay at the 60 units cap with none new units being built, we slowly get our first T-copter back up in a safe spot and sneak with our second until we reach this spot. Even without new units being built though, this area isn't safe. We can't even go for the HQ cap when the train is around, so we are forced on a specific cycle. There is a tank and that APC, both able to stop the capture. Yeah, because APCs are actually able to attack in this game. And guard mode or any AI quirk that we could abuse like that doesn't seem to exist. So, how are we going to do anything? Well, let's build a lander. No, I'm not changing the subject, I swear. Oh, and how is your day, by the way? Doing good? Yeah? What? What's... Oh, the game. Don't worry about it. Just watch. Yep, we made the tank ambush itself so it couldn't attack, while the APC didn't do shit. Why is that? For the APC, it's just a 1 in 5 chance for it to attack, that's all. Meanwhile, for the tank, the AI always wants to attack from the best defensive terrain. And strangely, it doesn't seem to want to block its upper bases, where it always builds first from, thus making the tank move all the way towards the lower base instead, and run into our T-copter. And remember that lander? It helped with that too, as it made this sub move away far enough so the AI didn't have any vision of our T-copter, and making the ambush possible. Even such a unit was crucial in the end. You know, earlier, I was talking about playing with fire. I was playing with lava for this one. It's just insane how unlikely all of this happening is. And without Fog of War, this strat wouldn't even be possible. Deathless would still be, but while also getting to the HQ, not that fast at least. Also, for anyone wondering, facing Yamamoto instead wouldn't change much, and most of the strat would just need a bit of a rework. In particular, the T-copter being used to block the fighter, but it wouldn't be impossible. Now, finally, for the theoretical limit on this map, with how loading units in transports work in this game, not letting you move right after, Day 10 is the minimum we could go for. But Day 8 is technically the only moment where the train isn't around, then Day 12. And sure, there are ways to get around this issue, but even without that, the AI will have too many air units around early on anyway. So, Day 12 looks to be the fastest this can be beaten. Deathless at least. Oh. Well, I'm hearing that I can't hijack this video and channel any longer. Too bad. So, I'll let you see the rest with the Eggman. Go ahead, Mengs. Show them what you're made of. Yoke energy!
So, ladies and gentlemen, I guess we can finally answer the question. Is it possible to beat Super Famicom Wars without losing a single unit? Yes. Yes, it is. If you happen to get NH to beat the final map for you, that is. For the rest of us, I don't think it is. You need to be utterly insane to actually come up with a strategy for Countdown. To end this video, I want to show the 4 different endings of Super Famicom Wars. You actually get different cutscenes and music depending on the campaign that you beat. For Orange Star, you get this ending. For Blue Moon, you get this ending. For Green Earth, you get this ending. And for Yellow Comet, you get this ending. Fun fact, the Blue Moon ending actually got a remix in the Advance Wars 1+2 reboot camp. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I put a ton of effort into this video, more than I care to admit, so I really would appreciate it if you left a like, and if you actually sat through the whole thing from start to finish, I would love it if you left a comment saying you did so, because I always enjoy seeing which of you are crazy enough to do that. This is by far the hardest challenge I've done on this channel. It's not even close, and it cost me more than a few brain cells. What the next step is, I don't know. Maybe I'll go even further back into the series. If you have any suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below as well. Anyway, my name has been Mangs. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.